Our next speaker is Pauline Tully.
So good afternoon to everyone, and first of all I'd like to thank Áine Flynn for her presentation and to all the guests here today for attending the meeting to inform us about the Assisted Decision Making Capacity Act of 2015 and the establishment of the Decision Support Service. I think we all recognise here how important this is, and particularly in relation to the full implementation of the UNCRPD. Without this act, which can't really be fully realised. I suppose my first question is around the timescale. Like, the act was passed in 2015. Would it always have been foreseen that it was going to take 7 years for the act to be actually operational? I mean, or was there an issue around funding, or what were the issues that actually delayed the bill, if it was delayed, or was that, as I said, always going to be the timescale? And I suppose about the whole role of decision-making assistant, co-decision maker, or decision-making representative. I mean, it's about the whole process. Will the process of engaging with this service be straightforward and uncomplicated? And how will people find out information and be able to access the service? Also, I suppose, do you anticipate tension and maybe possible opposition to the operation of this act from family carers, especially those who care for family members with fairly complex disabilities, who may feel that as next of kin they know what is right for the person concerned, or will they, in some cases, end up as the decision-making representative? Is that possible, or does it have to be someone who's neutral to the family? And I suppose decisions sometimes could be made by a person which is contrary maybe to what some of the other persons in the family feel is the right thing, and how to resolve that. And then even how to communicate properly with some people who may not be even verbal, that have quite extreme or complex disabilities as well. And I did have a question about the cost, but I think you have dealt with that with the previous speaker as well. So thank you, Áine.
Thank you very much. If we think first of all about the timescale, which I think was the first of your questions, well, I hope I've conveyed an impression that there was rather a lot to do. So, and I think, quite honestly, when I came into post, which was 2 years post commencement of the Act, I may myself have underestimated the sheer scale of what was involved. This is dense, complex legislation. It's certainly ambitious. It attempts more than other comparable pieces of legislation in other jurisdictions. So there literally was a lot to do, and the direction from early days was to do it all at once. Some other acts might be more amenable to an incremental rollout, but the decision had been taken, and I think it's correct, that everything should come together and be greenlit at once. Having said that, we did hope that it would be quicker. There were, and we have been open about this, funding issues. The direction was to do it, and to do it quickly. We had to plan in relation to that, and presented budget proposals in relation to that, and didn't get what we looked for in terms of our allocation in either 2019 or 2020. There was also some delay in achieving approval for our ICT project. Again, that was linked somewhat to budget allocation, and there was a concern that we'd be committing to a vision for the ICT without the funding to back it up. So there were delays of that nature. Really, things stepped up and improved, and had a sense of much better momentum and political will at the beginning of last year, when we were asked to present a 24-month plan to commencement. And ideally, we'd have presented a 12-month plan to commencement and been resourced accordingly, but it was considered that 24 months at that point was realistic. So that plan was presented, endorsed, and as I've said, we got the budgetary uplift that we looked for 2021. A budget is only a year's budget, of course. So it will need to be backed up by a budget allocation in the coming year, and we'll be entering into the estimates process shortly, having regard to the fact that for the second half of next year we'll be an operating service with all of the costs associated with that, including fees for panel members. I think you asked next, Deputy, about those 3 tiers and the possible complexity of having to engage with our service, and we are very keen that this is an accessible and very much public-facing, person-centred service. So we want that to be, accessibility is going to be key, and it's with that in mind that we have engaged with focus groups to try and get a sense of how well we'll be able to work with them, and that so we are properly alert to their needs. I think CRPD would require that. The codes of practice, I think, will help with that, but we also are producing easy read guides, other guidance materials. My colleagues are hard at work on those at the moment, and we hope the engagement with us will be as straightforward as possible. I can say a little bit more about that if you like. I think your next question was about particular sensitivities that family carers might have, and we are aware of those. My colleague Patsy Fitzsimons and I have recently engaged in workshops with Family Carers Ireland, and we are aware. I think their concerns can be distilled down to this: like, life is hard enough, and it is. You know, that the task and the ask of a family carer is no small thing. So we are very sensitive to their apprehension that this might create a further burden, and that it is creating undue formality and cost and complexity, and that they have always been the decision makers and now they're being asked to do so in a formal and regulated way. So our message really is that we really work with them on that. We're not setting people up to fail here. But at the same time, to bring home that message that where they may have thought that they had a formal and authorised decision-making role up to this, they really don't, because next of kin does not mean anything. You don't have legal authority merely by virtue of that family relationship. So our message is that with this Act, you have the opportunity to step into a formal, recognised and unarguable legal role, so that you have security, if you like, security of tenure, so nobody can argue about your right to be in the room, to be accessing information, and if necessary to be the decision maker. And I think you asked whether at that upper tier of support it would be appropriate for a family member to be the decision maker, and the answer is yes. The Act specifically spells out that the court must have regard to the value of subsisting family relationships and to not interrupting those as far as possible, having regard always to the wishes and values, the will and preference of the relevant person himself or herself. So there's a very clear role and a preferred role for the trusted family member or friend. And then I think you asked about, and this is to be anticipated, whether there could be problems within the family dynamic, whether one family member will think a certain thing and the other will disagree. The Act sets out notice requirements so that it isn't possible for one family member to, if you like, to get in there ahead of other siblings, shall we say. If we imagine a situation where siblings might have different and competing views about what's best for an elderly parent with age-related cognitive impairment, if one sibling were to attempt to apply to court and to step into that decision-making representative role, they can't do it without putting other family members on notice, so that those other family members do have an opportunity to input, to object, and they can do it on the lower tiers of support as well. And then, you know, there will be decisions to be taken. We'll have to deal with objections, perhaps, that come our way, or the court might have to deal with objections to try and resolve difficulties. And those difficulties could arise post the registration of the arrangement in terms of complaints investigations. I don't know, Patsy, if you want to say a word about how there will be provision for dealing with complaints investigations, including alternative dispute resolution, which would be key to our processes.
Yes, thanks, Áine. Yes, indeed, the Act itself provides for the resolution of complaints and in an informal way as quickly as possible. So we are, as part of our process, setting up an informal resolution service within the DSS to help resolve those family conflictual situations that we do anticipate will arise, because not everybody is going to agree on every point or every action that a decision supporter is going to take. So we will have that. We will have trained staff in the DSS to help resolve those family disputes that will ultimately arise. And if we can't resolve them, then we will proceed to investigate those complaints and see if there is a need to try and, go to court to have that person removed, ultimately, if needs be. But obviously, our first protocol is to try and resolve them as quickly and as early as we can.